Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 10. We are officially past the midway point of the season and yet still have absolutely no idea who the best team in the National Football League may truly be. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, little known fact, there was a chance that I might not have been available to record this show this morning. I suffered a nasty paper cut and I was tempted to put myself on IR about 45 minutes before we kicked this thing off.
Really?
Yep.
What were you doing?
I was trying to move some papers around. I was trying to configure the office for maximum efficiency and be able to put the best content forward. And lo and behold, boom, paper cut right on the knuckle. Even got the little bleeder and all of that. I thought, you know what? I'm going to power through it because this is what our loyal listenership has grown accustomed to, us facing adversity and overcoming it.
The firefighters from Something About Mary have entered this conversation and they were yelling, "We've got a bleeder here." So when I look at this, the first thing you said is you're not sure who the number one team in the NFL is. That's very clear. If that team has a quarterback that's healthy, the Buffalo Bills are the
Well, that's why I said it.
Number two.
That's why I said it. We're going to get to that game, of course.
A paper cut was going to prevent you from not being on this podcast.
I mean, that's what happens. I'm not as tough as you are, all right? I'm not cut from that same cloth. I've grown soft in my old age on the north side of 40.
Little do you know that I almost called in a replacement for this podcast, but two things have transpired. One, that gentleman is traveling. And two, the weather in Syracuse looked a little too frigid for me, so I wasn't going to make that trek for the Florida State game this week.
Yeah,
I almost got a hair up my ass and went, and then I looked at the weather and said, ooh, 37. Ooh, I don't do 37.
Mercury, you do know it's a dome, for the record, and once the mercury dips below 65, we know you don't leave your house. It's okay. We understand. We get it.
I'm not going to spend the entire time inside the dome. It was going to be like a 3 or 4 day trip.
Yeah, you go from the dome to your car service into whatever the nicest hotel is in Central New York. All right. Let's get into a game that's going to have a little bit of weather on Thursday night to kick off the weekend. That, of course, is the Atlanta Falcons and the Carolina Panthers, renewing acquaintances from a game just a few short weeks ago. A contest that the Atlanta Falcons outlasted Carolina to the tune of 37-34 back in Week 8. The Falcons failed to cover as a 4-point home favorite, and it has been a recurring theme. Atlanta started off like a house on fire, covering numbers, the most undervalued commodity in the National Football League. It hasn't been the case over the last couple of weeks. P.J. Walker would love to go back to simpler times. He completed a 62-yard touchdown pass to DJ Moore. Should have been the game winner. Eddie Pinheiro had other thoughts, both at the end of regulation and in overtime. You look at Deontay Foreman, he was extremely dynamic running the football in that spot. But that's all in the past, Payne. Short week for two teams that know each other. It looks like it's going to be rather wet in the Charlotte area. We've seen a battle on the side. 1.5, 2 is where it opened, got as high as 3. There was some dog money that came in. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this game. I don't think a lot of our listeners care, other than that it's on Amazon Prime Video tonight. What's the one matchup that you're looking for that you think is going to have a major impact on deciding the side or total?
Is this what's actually happening? That these matchups in this season have been so quirky that people really aren't tuning in. I sent you a note a couple weeks ago, and I said, send your buddies at the books what they're seeing for volume. And even though some reports came out for August that said we were up $1 trillion in betting handle, it feels like the volume the last 3-4 weeks have been down because these primetime matchups just haven't been good. There haven't been a lot of high-profile NFL games thus far. Is that accurate?
I mean, that's part of it. And then the fact, like always, most people that bet the National Football League aren't nearly as educated as our loyal listeners around these parts. So when favorites don't come home to roost, you can't tie together big money line parlays with massive favorites, teasers, and that sort of thing, it depletes people's bankrolls faster than they ever want to admit. And we're seeing underdogs and unders hit at a ridiculous clip so far this season. We've seen how effective it's been betting underdogs of 4+ points, 7+ points. So if you're a pup player, you're reaping the benefits thus far. If you're betting unders, you are as well. But for the general public, that's been a massive drain on their bankroll since the start of the season.
Gotcha. So to the game, you mentioned it's going to be a little wet tonight in your spot on. They're calling for about a 68% chance of rain at kickoff. Some occasional gusts will be thrown in there. The quick turnaround is interesting because it's not just for this specific week, but with the matchup in general, because Atlanta and Carolina played back in week 8, and the Falcons closed a 4-point favorite at home. So it does make sense that once this line got to Falcons -3 on the road, we saw some buyback and respected money show an appetite for Carolina. And you would think short week advantage for the home team, and that still might be the case, but Carolina played on the road last week. Steve Wilkes also fired more staff members after last week's Bengals game. So he's down 4 staff members trying to prepare on a short week. That's not really a great recipe. I think there's at least one matchup on each side of the ball here to discuss, and I can do them quickly. I know we weren't going to full break down these games, but I think when the Falcons are on offense, it's going to be a run-heavy game plan, especially with the dome team playing outdoors in the rain. Carolina was slightly below average defending the run heading into last week, and then, poof, Joe Mixon happened, and he's had a horrific run all season basically, but he broke out, and Carolina was dead last week, gave up 0.4 EPA per rush, over 70% of the Bengals run plays graded successful. So on the season, Carolina is now dipped to 23rd in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. Panthers are stepping up in class, getting the 4th most efficient running offense in Atlanta, and now you have your horseback in Cordarrelle Patterson, who didn't play in the meeting 11 days ago. So you would think Atlanta's going to have some success here on the ground. When Carolina has the ball, they have an advantage as well, you would think, and it's through the air, but there's obviously some questions there with weather. Is that going to take a little bit of Carolina's advantage away? Can PJ Walker deliver the football confidently, right? I mean, after last week against Cincinnati, you do wonder if the confidence is there. Obviously,
were you surprised?
Atlanta,
hold on, were you surprised
yes.
They went back to PJ instead of giving the reins to Baker?
You really want me to answer that question?
Sure.
I think this specific head coach is the only one that would have went back to PJ
That's
Walker.
fair.
I think if there was a different head coach, it probably would have been different.
Gotcha.
So, even when PJ Walker was appearing competent, and you love the story, right? I mean, just a battler, has nothing to lose, showed well against Tampa. But again, they were down 3 guys in the secondary. And then you had Atlanta in the first meeting, down 3 guys in the secondary, lost another. And so that's obviously the area you want to attack for Atlanta. 29th in schedule adjusted pass efficiency. They're going to be without A.J. Terrell again, their lockdown corner. Casey Hayward is still on IR. So there's going to be some opportunities through the air for Carolina. And I think we all remember, P.J. Walker's ridiculous throw to DJ Moore, which you mentioned at the lead-in here back in week 8. And if you go to a traditional box score, you'll see P.J. Walker throw for 317 yards and think, wow, awesome. But that kind of camouflages the fact that he was horrific in that game as well. When you pop on the all-22, like Carolina had receivers running open through Atlanta's secondary all day long, and Walker, for the most part, couldn't really hit them. He actually had the worst completion percentage over expectation of any quarterback in week 8, 11% below expectation. And so maybe at some point tonight, it's not P.J., right? And I think it's smart to make Arthur Smith and the Falcons prepare for all 3 quarterbacks on a short week. But you just have to get DJ Moore the ball here. And I know Terrence Marshall is coming on. They want to see what they have there with the highly touted receiver that they picked last year. He's been getting more snaps, been getting more usage, been getting more targets, but really this needs to be a DJ Moore game. And we saw the breakout in week 7. It continued in week 8. You pair those 2 weeks together, 13 catches for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns. But somehow last week in chase mode, DJ Moore only saw 20% target share. So there just needs to be a concerted effort of getting that guy the ball, especially in this specific matchup. But just based upon what we're seeing here with passing props since they've opened, all coming under, and the total now as low as 42 from a peak of 44.5, it says the weather's going to be a real factor here tonight.
Yeah, it doesn't look great in terms of a total that was at 1.43.5 because you thought both these offenses could have success. Mother Nature clearly has other plans for what we're going to see unfold with these two teams playing again for the second time in about 2 weeks. On to the Sunday slate, and the NFL will make its long-anticipated debut in Germany at the home of Bayern Munich. A little bit disappointing that the NFL didn't think it was better to play in Germany during October for Oktoberfest football, but I digress. When you look at the number, I want to start here before we go anywhere else between the Bucs and Seahawks. We saw this price open with Tampa a 1-point favorite. Number got bet all the way up to 3 flat. We've started to see a very different school of opinion come in as the Seahawks are catching money, and the Seahawks have arguably been one of the most undervalued commodities in the entire National Football League all season long.
Yeah, not a game I had interest in from a side perspective at all. And now it seems like I'm the only one that seems to feel that way. There's been a little bit of a battle here between respected bettors and groups, and a couple guys got out early and laid the Bucs -1, 1.5, and 2. And then when we got to 3, there was a different mindset. And this is just your classic difference of opinion on how you arrive at your numbers. Because if you include priors in your model that look to previous seasons, you're probably going to be gravitating towards Tampa Bay here. If your model only looks at data from this season, it makes sense that Seattle would be a little attractive here. And there's also another element that kind of sides in Seattle's favor a little bit. This actually happens to be one of the hottest tickets of the entire season. The atmosphere is just going to be wild here. And somehow the Seattle Seahawks are actually the most popular team in Germany. So this might not be as neutral as you'd think for a game in foreign territory where people get to see the GOAT for the first time play live ever in Tom Brady. So that's something maybe to factor in a little bit here. I don't think it's going to be a massive home field advantage by any stretch, but it kind of leans that way is my understanding. A couple important things to this matchup. And, I think the story is great for Seattle, especially with Geno Smith leading the way. And I mean, nobody saw that coming, even Pete Carroll. But Seattle hasn't faced many good defenses. They've only played 2 stop units that are above average in schedule-adjusted efficiency, the Broncos and the 49ers. And in those 2 games, Seattle's churned out a negative 0.11 EPA per play combined. Only 42% of snaps have graded successful. And if you kind of extrapolated that out to what it would look like for a full season, it's bottom 5 league production. The other 7 defenses Seattle's played average out to be about 23rd in schedule adjusted efficiency. And now you're going up in class here because Tampa Bay is 7th right now, and they're probably better than that when they're actually healthy, right? I mean, Murphy Bunting and Carlton Davis were out a couple weeks. They returned in week 8. Hakeem Hicks was back last week. Antoine Winfield Jr. practiced in full on Wednesday. So this is a massive step up in class for Geno Smith and the Seahawks offense here. On the other side of the ball, there's hopefully something brewing here. And it's a little narrative-based, but I'm sure you saw this as well, Todd. Chris Godwin was mic'd up for the Rams game. And if you fast forward to the final drive, you heard Chris Godwin kind of rallying the troops, going up to Mike Evans and Tom Brady saying, this is the drive that turns our season around. This is the one. And Tampa goes on to score and win that game. Let's see if that's the start of some, renewed confidence, because we've kind of hinted at it for 3-4 weeks now that Tampa Bay, like a 3-point shooter, kind of needs to see the ball go through the net. And as bad as Byron Leftwich has been, there's just far too much talent on offense to not figure this out. Now, I know Seattle's defense is trending in the right direction. First 5 weeks, they were 31st in EPA per play allowed. Last 4 weeks, Seattle's 2nd in EPA per play allowed and 1st in success rate. Seattle is certainly playing with more confidence. The pressure's increased. The coverage has been better. And so I think there's clear improvement, but I will caution this just a little bit. During this 4-game sample of improvement for Seattle's defense, they've played Arizona twice, who's number 30 in offensive efficiency. One of those games was without Hopkins. an offense that they're also familiar with being in their division, right? They've played number 20, Los Angeles Chargers, and that unit is decimated by injury and trending substantially worse than their season-long 20th ranking that I just divulged there. The best offense during this 4-game improvement is Daniel Jones and the Giants, who are in a horrific situation, down a handful of starters on offense, traveling, what'd you do? You did the London trip, then to New York, then across the country. They were playing in some inclement conditions as well. So there could be slightly more opportunity for the Bucs offense than what you would see on surface based upon how Seattle's defense is playing right now the last month.
A couple of things I want to throw out here just to kind of put a little bit more historical things from historical perspective into context. You mentioned Geno Smith and what he's done this year. 3rd in the league in passer rating at 73% completion, 7.8 yards per attempt, 7 multi-touchdown games, 6 games with 100-plus passer rating. NFL high, 7 games with multiple passing touchdowns this year. Matches the total from his first 9 seasons combined. And when you look at his ability to stretch the field, has 10 passing touchdowns, traveling 15-plus yards downfield, tied with Josh Allen for the most in the NFL. Nobody else in the league has more than 5. On the other side, you talk about Tampa and potentially turning their season around. They've been an interesting case study because they're flirting with a dubious distinction at least through 10 games. With a loss on Sunday, they would join the 2016 Carolina Panthers as the only team since 1970 to have a losing record through 10 games despite being favored in every single one of their games. So no doubt 2 very different storylines than we anticipated coming into the season will be on full display Sunday from Germany. And I think if you would have told me before the year that one of these teams was going to come in with a winning record and the other one was going to be a game under 500, I probably would have laughed at you on a variety of fronts. But alas, here we are. Should be worth getting up for early Sunday morning, 9:30 Eastern kickoff time. Into what should have been the marquee game of the day, Sunday early afternoon between the Minnesota Vikings and Buffalo Bills. Obviously, the bloom is off the rose a little bit in this contest, and it's why the Bills are down to a 3.5-point home favorite with a total of 43.5. The side down from where we talked about it on Monday in that 7.5 range, the total down as well from where that opened in that 48.5 range. I guess, Payne, we could talk about X's and O's until we're blue in the face. We can talk about this Buffalo Bills defense and their potential vulnerability against Dalvin Cook and the Minnesota Vikings ground game. We can talk about the brothers playing on opposite sidelines in Dalvin Cook and James Cook. Stephon Diggs, his homecoming, a game against the team that traded him. That draft pick ultimately resulted in them acquiring Justin Jefferson, so both sides win. But Josh Allen, that's where we have to start and maybe where we end with the way we assess this football game.
That is all the talk this week is obviously Josh Allen, and rightfully so. He's one of the best players in the league at the most valuable position, and the Bills have leveraged their salary cap on the idea of Super Bowl or bust, with Allen not completely crushing the cap currently, and it's certainly not a foolproof thing, but when you start to assess games like this, what I can say with conviction and what comes true the vast majority of the time is the market knows better than media members. The guys that are pummeling the market with 5- and 6-figure bets know better than the guy on ESPN. And so for Buffalo to dip from 9.5 to 3.5 and the total from as high as 49.5 down to 43.5, it signals that Josh Allen is out. From the injury guys that I speak to, we'll see what ultimately comes of this. It sounds like the Bills potentially dodged a bullet here, but he does have a slightly torn UCL, and that could certainly lead to further damage if he were to go out there and play. So it would make sense to make sure he's 100% before you return him, and your goal is still the same. It's Super Bowl or bust. So it might be a little bit more difficult now, because if he's out a month, home field advantage might not run through Buffalo, but you still have, on paper, the best team in the league. I don't know what this line does when it actually becomes official on the screen that Josh Allen is out. we'll probably see both the side and the total tick lower again. And at that point, I think you might have some folks wanting to back Case Keenum and the Bills at a depressed price here. And so when I look at that, I think it makes some sense to be a little bit patient here. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I would assume it dips below the 3 when that becomes official on the screen. And we know Case Keenum played for Minnesota, so some added motivation there for him. But I do think we'll see professional bettors, whether it's simply middling this game because they got out ahead of the information, or it's a real position. I do ultimately think the Bills will be the side once that hits the screen officially, and you can potentially lay below a field goal with the Bills. But I do think, Todd, the biggest factor here is actually on the other side of the ball. And it comes down to Buffalo's secondary health. And is that unit healthy enough to play the way Leslie Frazier and McDermott want to? We know Micah Hyde's out for the season, right? Poyer's dealing with an elbow injury. We're still waiting on Tre'Davious White's return. A lot of people thought it was going to be last week. Maybe it's this week at home. Matt Milano was out last week. So what we're trying to figure out, at least on my end, is did the Bills play a different style of defense against the Jets because it was Zach Wilson, or because they didn't have the healthy parts to play their typical coverage schemes? Because they completely changed things up last week if you look at the data. And if the Bills are going to go back to playing their typical style of defense because they're a touch healthier there, I think they show well. I mean, we broke down last week when we cashed with the Commanders why their defense would have some advantages against the Vikings offense. And it's because they showed an ability to be able to stop run from 11. And the Commanders ultimately really gave Minnesota some fits. After the opening script, the Commanders held the Vikings to a 29% success rate the final 3 quarters. Now you get a Buffalo defense that's 6th in schedule adjusted run defense. The Bills have played a fringe top 5 schedule of offenses this season. If Buffalo does a good job limiting runs, it's now on Kirk Cousins again. And if you go back to a preview we did for Monday Night Football against the Titans, where we mentioned how difficult it is to play action the style of defense Buffalo typically runs, it's kind of the same thing here. So you look at Cousins. He throws with play action on 32% of his dropbacks. That's a top 10 rate. And Cousins with play action grades out a top 10 passer. When Cousins doesn't use play action, though, his passer rating dips 24 points, the adjusted accuracy decreases by 9%, and Cousins' turnover-worthy play percentage nearly doubles. So I know everyone's waiting on word for Josh Allen. I think a lot of us are waiting on word for the Bills' defensive injuries. And so, again, if Josh Allen is announced out and this price dips below the 3 and the Bills' defensive injuries look improved, I think we're going to see the sharpest bettors actually take a real position on the Bills at a depressed price under 3 here, Todd.
When you look at the Vikings' overall body of work, we know that they have been extremely fortunate in terms of positive regression. You look at how they've performed at 1-score games. It's a far cry from last year where they finished 6-8 in that department. How difficult is it as a pro bettor to assess your full body of work, knowing that there is an element of luck variance, but some of that obviously attributed to coaching and being much more buttoned up? The perfect illustration, how the Vikings ended the game last week against the Commanders, never giving the football back to Washington with a shade more than 2 minutes to go.
Oh, they're much better coached, and they are not sitting at 7-1 with the coaching staff they had last year. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of where we view the Vikings perceptually, they're about a middle of the pack team, slightly above average in our power ratings. And, you know, they're about average on both sides of the ball, as crazy as that's going to sound. They haven't really played a great schedule to this point, and when you look kind of moving forward, the schedule gets a little bit tougher. So we'll ultimately see what Minnesota is, but they're sitting in a perfect position here at 7-1, where even if they kind of limp home to the backstretch, they're going to make the playoffs. And that's a very difficult building to play in if they're going to host a playoff game. And ultimately, for our listeners, we don't really care what Minnesota is as long as they pick up 2 more wins and make it to the playoffs. But yes, this is very much an average football team by our power ratings, despite the record.
Yeah, that's the most important part for all things Vikings. But for the Vikings fans out there, I'll give you this final nugget. when you're looking at their overall body of work so far. This marks the Vikings' largest division lead at any point in a season since 1976. What happened that year? Their last Super Bowl trip, and no team has ever blown a 4+ division game lead in the National Football League. So put your heads on the pillow at night with that being a little bit of solace, regardless of how Sunday's game in Western New York plays out. From early Sunday afternoon, Payne, into the mid-afternoon, a game that has two of the marquee franchises in the National Football League doing battle, but one of them looking anything but a big-ticket item. The Green Bay Packers welcome in the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas is a 5-point road favorite. Total on this game, 43. This is a 9.5-point adjustment from where this game was priced before the season started, with Green Bay being listed as a 4.5-point chalk. The big storyline here, Mike McCarthy homecoming game. Rodgers has talked about it and how it will be great to see. Ironic, given that all the stories when McCarthy left Green Bay, Rodgers was the reason that he ran him out of town. Mike McCarthy, second most wins by a Packers head coach behind only Curly Lambeau. And when you look at Dallas, though, for America's team, they've been bettor's favorite team. 19-6 against the spread overall, best record in the National Football League. 10-2 ATS on the road, the best in the NFL. 9-0 straight up in ATS versus teams with a losing record. And when you look at Mike McCarthy, he's actually been very good with extra time to prepare. 12-2-1 against the spread in his career following a bye. Best ATS record by a head coach following a bye since the 1970 merger. This is going to be low-hanging fruit, Payne, but it's a question I have to ask. And, I hate to try and dance on the grave of a Green Bay's Packers team that we thought has been extremely fortunate over the last couple of years. Packer fans were not shy about offering up their disdain for my takes on all things related to Green Bay. But Green Bay's path to victory, should there be one come Sunday afternoon, what do they have to do on the offensive side against this Dallas defense? Is it as simple and straightforward as going, establish A.J. Dillon, establish Aaron Jones, hope Aaron Rodgers only has to throw it 15 times against this Cowboys pass rush?
I actually think it's best to start with where you actually started, because there is some narrative stuff built in here with the return of Mike McCarthy to Lambeau. And I don't know if you watched that presser or not, but he was pretty emotional talking about it earlier this week. And it felt like it carried over to the locker room, because you had starting Cowboys tackle Tyler Smith openly say, and I quote, "We're all ready to pound and break the Packers for Mike McCarthy." And so you have this really motivated Cowboys team that's well rested here off the bye. And you just wonder how the Packers are going to respond after last week, right? We talked about this on Monday. That was Green Bay's get right spot. You could get yourself back to 4-5 and in the thick of things in the NFC, because that is wide open in that conference. And we saw Sharp Money just drill the Packers, laid the 3, closed 4, perfect weather conditions in the Dome. And you had some guys back offensively with Lazard and Watson. And the Lions defense at that time was dead last in schedule adjusted efficiency. And Bupkis, you got nothing from the game. The game plan stunk. The execution wasn't good enough. The talent still isn't there. The care factor seems to be questionable at best. And then you look at the injury report this week, Todd.
It ain't good. It ain't good, my friend.
17 players listed on it to start the week. My God, 10 of those have not participated at all to this point. And there's a couple guys that aren't on the injury report because they're out for the season. That's Rashawn Gary. He's the Packers' best defender out for the year. Devondre Campbell, the Packers' most important defender in green dot of the defense in the middle, missed last week with suffering, with a knee injury after he got dinged up in the Buffalo game on Sunday Night Football. He is yet to practice. Past that, the matchups lean in favor of Dallas as well. I mean, you have a Packers defense 31st in schedule-adjusted run defense. Over 48% of the runs against Green Bay have graded successful this season. That's against a schedule of offenses that's below league average. And now a rested Dallas offense comes to town, who's third best in rushing efficiency. And so the perception here is, dome team in Dallas going to Lambeau. How are they going to survive? But the reality is the team built for weather with the better defense and running game is Dallas. And you have this game that's going to be in the high 20s, and you have something that is really going to suck doing, and that's trying to make tackles. And you now have a beaten and battered Packers defense that appears somewhat disinterested and can't stop the run. And they've also graded out 20th in tackling. So it's not a good combination. And if you look on the season, the Packers are 1-4 against teams with an offense with an above-average schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. Dallas, again, is third best, so that's something there. Now, to your main question, I don't know what to expect from the Packers offense. I mean, this unit has not scored a touchdown in God knows how long, right? Touchdowns on just 22% of possessions the last 4 weeks. It's the worst in the league. And you kind of go back to what we said with Aaron Rodgers a few weeks ago when we were breaking down another Packers game, and it was talking about self-preservation. This kind of feels like a spot where you could see that, right? I mean,
throw it away. Throw it away. The pass rush comes in, chuck it 15 rows into the stands, Aaron.
I mean, he's third quickest in time to throw among qualifiers. He's just kind of hot potatoing the ball out there. He's got the second lowest completed air yards. The Packers are very much afraid of pressure right now, whether it's scheme or quarterback or whatever. The receivers are not creating separation, so just everything is quick and short. David Bakhtiari couldn't finish the Lions game last week with this nagging knee injury that we talk about every freaking week. So is he going to actually be out there? Is Aaron Rodgers going to have his beloved left tackle? If not, you're going against a Cowboys defense that leads the league in pressure rate at 42%. And they also do a really good job rallying and tackling, top 10 there. So when you talk about cold weather, a team that throws short, and now you have a defense that can get pressure and rally and tackle, that's not great. The reason this line is gone just this week, because you mentioned the 9.5-point adjustment from the look-aheads this offseason to today, but even this week, we've seen the Cowboys go from the sharpest shops open 4, and we're now out to 5. And I think perceptually, it's hard to fathom Green Bay at home, huge home field advantage, dome team coming into Lambeau. Like, how could they be getting 5? But if you remove the logo from the helmet, we have Green Bay power rated in the bottom 10 of this league. And we said a couple weeks ago how we had them like slightly below an average team, and nothing's improved the last few weeks. And so when you kind of strip the Packers vibe from the equation here, they kind of share company with teams like Atlanta in our power ratings. And it just wouldn't be shocking, right, if suddenly Dallas was on the road at Atlanta laying 4. That wouldn't boggle your mind. And so I think that's how you kind of need to visualize it for this line to make more sense and kind of remove the perception and the idea that this is the 2020 Packers and Aaron Rodgers is playing at an MVP level.
Great. So you've now just officially made me really excited when we get to talk about the Green Bay Packers and Tennessee Titans a week from today, and we get to break down that game, and I want to gouge my eyes out. So thank you for that, for laying those solid foundations for two teams that put me to sleep almost on a weekly basis, one of which owns me, the other team is owning themselves. As far as,
but before we get into Sunday Night Football, I know are we leaving this game?
I want to
finish this game if that's.
I just want to ask one question: are the Cowboys eventually going to come to their senses though with their offensive game plan and realize that Tony Pollard has to be a bigger part of what they want to do offensively because he adds that big play potential? Or with Ezekiel Elliott returning to the fold, are we going to see more of the same? Zeke is a little bit more of a plotter, averaging a shade more than 4 yards per touch, and Tony Pollard showing the explosive big play potential we saw against the Bears, being relegated to a change of pace back instead of the feature guy.
I'm going to break your balls here because this is, the internet take that we just need to send Zeke to the glue.
No,
factory.
I don't say that. I just want to see more of an equal distribution based on some of the things that we've seen.
Based on what Zeke is making, he's being wildly overpaid, and no one on planet Earth can dispute that fact. And yes, Tony Pollard needs to be implemented in the offense more, but early on in the season when you were down a cast of characters at wide receiver, you can implement Tony Pollard into the game that way, and they just weren't doing it enough.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's been a usage thing for Tony Pollard for as long as we can remember. Now, he showed fantastically as the lead back, but he still didn't get a ton of touches in that game. And you look at his size and his stature, is that a guy who can touch it 25 times a game? Because ideally, that's how many times you'd like to get it to him.
I don't think I quite go that far, but I just look at his skill set, and again, it's not apples to apples.
We know he's good.
To like an Austin Eckler and his workload for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, Austin Eckler, and we'll talk about it in the next game, is
segue.
13th in target rate. So, I mean, that's Austin Eckler's touching the ball quite a bit. And I do think Tony Pollard needs the ball more, but in a game like this that we're specifically talking about, you do want a guy that's going to run between the tackles and pummel a disheartened defense with physicality who does not want to tackle you. And so Zeke Elliott off the bye week, well rested, is going to play a major role in this game in my mind.
It's okay.
And I think he's going to be efficient doing it.
Don't worry.
But before we transition here, we talk about this a little bit off air, and we've hinted at it. And like, this season in the NFL is one of the weirdest and quirkiest we've seen in God knows how long. And we've kind of hinted at why those things are happening and transpiring. But even discussing and breaking down these games, like, we've had a difficult time identifying the 4 or 5 or 6 best matchups on the board because, again, Green Bay wouldn't necessarily be a team we're talking about in these breakdowns because they're 3-6, but it's that Cowboys-Packers game that you just have to discuss. And it's weird doing it because, you know, the Packers typically wouldn't be an underdog this large at home. And you look at the rest of the board, just a lot of weird matchups, and it's happening because the season is by far and away the quirkiest we've had in quite some time.
Well, typically not an underdog of this size at home. You are spot on. I don't think you necessarily knew one of the nuggets that I wanted to share before we close the book here. This will be the first time Aaron Rodgers has been a home underdog of more than 4 points, including the playoffs during his entire career. So it puts things in perspective there. When you look at what Rodgers has done as a home underdog, though, in the past at much shorter prices, 4-2-1 straight up, 5-1-1 ATS. I mean, it's been quite some time since we've seen Rodgers as a home underdog, and it just speaks to how Green Bay has really struggled. But as we say this, it hasn't stopped people from betting Green Bay +5 at some of the more prominent shops right now. On to Sunday Night Football we go. Los Angeles Chargers will head north to the Bay Area to take on the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers, a 7-point home favorite. Total on the game, 45.5. Payne, this is a battle of prolific running backs that are true dual threats. You kind of hinted at Aaron Eckler, his usage rate. We've seen what Christian McCaffrey can be or what he may become in this 49ers offense. These are 2 of the 3 backs in the league that have 3,000 rushing and 3,000 receiving yards since 2017. The Chargers, meanwhile, are seeking the best 9-game start since 2018 after winning 4 out of their last 5 games. Chargers, better team on the road than they are at home, but I look at the matchups on paper in this one, and you try and figure out a pathway to success for Los Angeles. Hopefully, you're going to elucidate me and the rest of our audience and tell us how this game can be competitive.
So we can start with the Chargers offense against the 49ers defense, and this is where you'll see Austin Eckler out there, not Aaron Eckler, because that was a good transition from the Packers game to the Chargers game here. That would be a heck of a combination if you had Aaron Eckler, a guy who could throw the ball a country mile and be very proficient catching balls out of the backfield, Todd. So when I look at this, and specific to the matchup, by the way, what the hell's going on over there with you? Losing connection in the desert.
This is what happens. You know, you live in the middle of the boonies. Sometimes you have a pup tent in the backyard. You don't get connectivity. It's how things work around these parts.
Twice in one show, you missed the joke. You couldn't even fire back at my joke.
Yeah, but we don't miss a beat here. Our listeners don't know that. We're pulling back the curtain here in terms of the kind of shenanigans that goes on to record these shows sometimes.
Well, they were expecting you to defend yourself after the joke I just made.
Well, great. Now I'm going to have to go back and listen to the whole podcast, see what kind of cheap shot you hurled in my direction.
So, focusing back in here, because we apparently both have ADD today. When you look at the Chargers offense against the 49ers defense, there's just some weirdness to this, right? And like past the price and the matchups, which you can get to here in a second, I think, why this game's difficult for me is you train yourself as a pro bettor to shy away from some situations. And your initial thought process here is like, I don't really want to be looking towards the primetime public favorite. The NFL is a contrarian league. You want to find specific elements happening on the field that the market hasn't accounted for, and many times that comes with underlying things that aren't translating to the scoreboard and the win column. So you're typically gravitating towards the lesser team. For me personally, this is another game where the price indicates the NFL betting market is more sophisticated than ever before. And, you have a Chargers team with Boy Wonder at the helm and Justin Herbert, who I respect a ton. I think he's one of the most talented quarterbacks this league's ever seen, candidly. And he can make up for just about anything. Injuries, poor coaching, doesn't matter. And in the win-loss column, the Chargers have won 4 of 5. And mind you, when I say this, I'm a guy that yells to the heavens about entering or not entering high-hold future markets and still wanted a piece of the Chargers at 20-1 before the season. But this team right now is very much a fraud. I mean, we have the Chargers in their current form power rated a bottom 10 team in this league. And it has been ugly despite the wins. Since week 6, among 34 qualifying quarterbacks with at least 50 snaps played, Justin Herbert is 29th in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation. The problems are still occurring that we've been talking about for 2+ years now. I mean, Herbert's averaging 5.6 air yards per pass attempt over that stretch. It's the 3rd lowest in the league, and it's a combination of Joe Lombardi calling plays, but now there's no space creators downfield on this Chargers roster. Mike Williams is out with the high ankle sprain. Keenan Allen was never that guy, but if you were throwing short like they were so much, you were relying upon an elite route runner. He doesn't look like he's going to play again this week. And so everything is a short pass for the Chargers offense right now. And you get a 49ers defense that's coming off the bye, that's getting substantially healthier, that's top 5 defending short passes, that's top 5 in rallying and tackling. I mentioned Austin Eckler. He's currently 13th in the league in targets as a running back. San Francisco has elite linebackers that cover extremely well. The Chargers can't run the ball most weeks, even when they play bad run defenses. They're 29th overall. The 49ers defense, top 5 stopping the run. So you have this Chargers offense that's going to be playing in a phone booth on Sunday night, and that's really where they've been playing for the last month. And you have arguably the best phone booth defense in the NFL with the 49ers. And to boot, we haven't even gotten to one of the other factors. If San Francisco is able to build a lead here offensively, you have a top 5 defense in the 49ers in pressure rate. The Chargers are already down their left tackle for the season. The right tackle is highly questionable for this game, and that was part of the offensive line we had questions about, right? The right side of the line, starting a rookie on the right side and pairing him with a journeyman and Trey Pipkins. And Pipkins left the Falcons game early, did not return, has not practiced yet this week. So that's a situation we have to keep our eye on as well, Todd.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. I mean, perception for certain teams takes a while to catch up, especially those teams that were expected to be fantasy relevant with a star quarterback at the helm, and that's clearly what the Chargers have. But anybody who's watched this team over the last couple weeks, despite their ability to win football games, isn't blown away by what the data says, shouldn't be blown away by what the eye test tells you. The one silver lining for the Chargers, at least coming out of their camp, is that Justin Herbert feels as healthy now as he did early in the year before suffering the rib injury against the Jaguars. You probably wouldn't know that looking at some of the options that he has at his disposal that you highlighted there with no Mike Williams, no Keenan Allen, and it changes the dynamic when you're running for your life behind a makeshift offensive line. The other side of the ball, Payne, the Chargers' run defense was their Achilles heel last year. They spent a ton of money in free agency to try and bolster that side of the defense. It ain't been much better so far this year, and it's clearly not going to get better when you lose another key contributor for the season in Austin Johnson. I don't want to oversimplify what San Francisco needs to run because Kyle Shanahan never likes to make it that easy. But at the same time, you got Christian McCaffrey. You have a talented offensive line that can open holes on the ground. Is it as simple and straightforward as running the football, setting up play action, and being able to utilize some of their weapons in the passing attack with a healthy George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel?
Sometimes it is, right? Do what you do well. Attack opponent weakness. And those two things converge here. I mean, this is just not a good matchup for the Chargers either on this side. I mean, they're 29th in schedule adjusted defensive rush efficiency, and that's not a lie because you have the supporting, more predictive measure in that the Chargers are also 31st in yards allowed before first contact. And you mentioned they're down Austin Johnson on the interior line, who was one of their best in run-stop win rate. Kyle Shanahan, we know, is known as a run game master. Off the bye week, right, he's going to have some wrinkles within that run game. And the 49ers O-line was able to get a little bit healthier. Kittle and Juszczyk a little bit healthier. You get CMC further involved into the game plan and familiar with the playbook. I think the 49ers are going to be able to run right at the Chargers all night long. And if you look at the Chargers defense, 41% of drives against them so far this season have either reached the opponent red zone or scored before reaching the red zone. That's 30th in the league. So the other perceptional thing here is that Brandon Staley, who is supposed to be this defensive wizard, he was supposed to be this new school defensive hero. Like, he found the formula to stop these high-powered passing offenses. And maybe he has, but the offense have kind of like conformed to the weakness and are now able to really hurt defenses like this. He's been a bust thus far through 2 seasons, specific to his defense. And I think the goal for any defense playing the 49ers, right? Stop the run, make Jimmy G beat you, make Jimmy G uncomfortable throwing in known passing situations, let your pass rush get after him. Problem is the Chargers are 29th in first down defensive efficiency. So that tells me Jimmy G isn't going to be all that uncomfortable in a game like this. Joey Bosa's still down, so you lose a prominent pass rusher like that. You have 2 good tackles to combat Khalil Mack. And you also have to remember that Brandon Staley was with the Rams for the 2020 season. Played Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers twice. Lost both games. Jimmy G in the first matchup finished with a 91 QBR against Staley's defense. And while he wasn't great, Shanahan beat Staley in the second meeting with a guy named Nick Mullins under center. So to me, what we've heard, and we'll just keep it honest, a couple guys that I've talked to have been telling me they like the Chargers here. I just can't see it. And so it'll be ultimately interesting if this does get below the 7 here, Todd, if I decide to go island game. And that's really my debate on this one so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to make a strong, compelling case for backing the underdog. I think it'll be fascinating to see exactly how this game shakes out, where there's potential liability for the sports books, and how the public decides to get involved with, quite frankly, the most marquee game of the weekend with 2 big-name brands, relatively speaking, and, of course, a big-name quarterback under center for the Los Angeles Chargers in a week that doesn't offer a ton. I think this game offers a lot of intrigue, and we'll see if the 49ers are able to exploit all of those weaknesses that you outlined for the Chargers. You can follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, like always, follow the Bet the Board podcast, @BetTheBoardPod. If you haven't already done so, sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. A great reminder about all the things we're doing here in the podcast space, a couple of the articles that we post throughout the course of the week, and some additional actionable elements to try and get you involved in the player prop market. And like I've reminded you, all of our loyal listeners in the past, I want you guys to check out the Cardboard Chat podcast, a great introduction to sports memorabilia, specifically the sports trading card space, and how it can serve as an alternative investment asset class, especially for the sports enthusiasts out there that we know tune into this show every week. There is one other thing that we have to do before we bid our listeners Payne a fond farewell for yet another week of both college and pro football. It's figuring out where we're going to go for the most actionable element on a relatively unattractive NFL Sunday.
Tough. Let's just put it that way. I mean, you're looking at 5 games that are still circled in red with lower limits, because that's what a disaster this board is right now. We're going to try to navigate our way through some of these landmines, and we're going to go to rotation number 251, the Cleveland Browns. So just in terms of market perspective, Pinnacle, FanDuel, DraftKings, South Point, Will Hill, Caesars, Win, all dealing 4 on this game. Chris dealing, a juiced 3.5 on the Dolphins. Let's call this Cleveland +4 -15 for grading purposes, so kind of split the difference there. When I look at this one, I think Cleveland's offense is being a little devalued in the market. And if you actually look at what they've done, I know Jacoby Brissett isn't this shiny object that everyone kind of clamors for and gravitates towards, but the Browns are 5th in schedule-adjusted offensive efficiency right now, and they've played an above-average schedule of defenses. And if you look at the last 3 weeks, it's really been a tough slate of defenses. You get Belichick, you get Baltimore, and the Bengals. Those are 2 top 8 defenses, and I think with health and some additions, we're going to see the Ravens end with a top 10 defense. And now you get Miami, who's 27th in efficiency and trending worse. They had no answers for the Chicago Bears offense, which was quite one-dimensional last week. The Dolphins cannot get pressure, so they're trying to send more blitzes, and they can't defend the pass. And it's just a bad combination. So Miami right now, 23rd in pressure rate, despite blitzing at the 4th highest rate. It's leaving them exposed on the back end. You know my feelings on Xavier Howard. Isn't a true lockdown corner. Really never has been. He's just been a playmaker on the ball, so he gets that perception. If Miami doesn't get pressure, they're allowing the 3rd worst EPA per dropback. Jacoby Brissett has been very, very good against the blitz when no pressure gets home. So when defenses blitz, pressure doesn't get there. He's been able to navigate things, find the open man, find the explosive. Positive 0.91 EPA per dropback and a 60% success rate when defenses blitz and don't get home. You also look at the style of defense the Dolphins play. They don't use that too high shell. They play a lot of man. Brissett has huge splits, substantially better against man coverage. And on the other side of the ball, just quickly, there is some familiarity. I know a lot of people don't like the Browns defensive coordinator, Joe Woods. It's understandable with the talent and some of the resources they've spent on that side of the ball. They haven't really played the way that you would hope. Denzel Ward's back this week. But also, let's not forget that Joe Woods was a member of the San Francisco 49ers. He was their secondary coach before being promoted to the Browns DC job. He spent time there with Mike McDaniel, so he's quite familiar with this style of offense, having seen it every single day at practice. So you have a little underlying element there. That is the best bet this week. Rotation number 251, Cleveland Browns +4, -15 cents.
I like that little tricky element. It's something that I hadn't even considered in the handicap, the level of familiarity with Joe Woods and Mike McDaniel. So it's a lot to think about there to see what the Browns look like with a couple of weeks to prepare for this thing. Always scary fading this Dolphins offense in its current iteration, but those things that come up must come down, and we'll see exactly how things play out in your neck of the woods Sunday afternoon with the Cleveland Browns. All right, my man, 5 games, not the most attractive slate, but we did the best we could. We made all of our listeners smarter like we do every single Thursday throughout the course of the fall. I'm going to have to go back, listen to the show, figure out where you took your cheap shots, defend myself over text, or come out hurling haymakers come Monday's podcast, but that's neither here nor there. Anything else you would like to share, disclose, get off your chest before you get 72 hours worth of vacation away from me?
I'm going to say one thing. Do not respond. Just envision in your mind that if Aaron Rodgers and Austin Eckler had a baby, what would it look like? What would its name be? And that's where you'll find the joke.
I'm not even sure where to take that. And it's not often that I'm left speechless, but I am right now. So best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners. Enjoy what should be a great weekend of football in one capacity or another. And regardless of where your investments take you, want to see you cashing tickets. But most importantly, with a Browns ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.